The laughter began before the Duke had finished speaking. Not loud laughter. That would have been kinder. It was the restrained sort that traveled through a royal ballroom in whispers, hidden smiles, lowered fans, and eyes that refused to meet the humiliated woman standing beneath the chandeliers. Lady Aurelia Vane looked down at her gown, then slowly raised her eyes to her husband. The Duke of Blackthorn stood 6 feet away. His face was rigid. His voice had been loud enough for nearly everyone around them to hear. "Don't ever wear that again." Aurelia said nothing. That was what unsettled him. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps anger, perhaps the sharp answer she usually gave when he became too commanding. Instead, she merely looked at him, for 3 long seconds, then 4. Around them, the king's winter court had gone strangely quiet. The orchestra continued playing, but even the musicians seemed to sense that something had happened. Duke Julian Vane suddenly became aware of every person watching. Lady Cressida Mawley was hiding a smile behind her fan. Lord Pembroke had turned away, pretending interest in a marble statue. The Duchess of Norland looked almost offended on Aurelia's behalf. Julian lowered his voice. "Aurelia." She glanced down at the gown again. It was not scandalous. It was not revealing. It was not even unfashionable. That was precisely why nobody understood his anger. The gown was deep midnight blue, cut simply, with pale silver stitching around the sleeves. No diamonds, no extravagant train, no expensive French lace. Yet Julian had reacted as though she had entered the palace, dressed as a kitchen maid. Aurelia looked back at him. "You dislike it that much?" Julian noticed the watching faces. His pride made the next mistake. "You are Duchess of Blackthorn." Aurelia waited. Julian should have stopped. He did not. "You should not appear at His Majesty's court dressed as though you are begging to be overlooked." Someone behind them inhaled sharply. Aurelia's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. Julian noticed it. He would remember that look for years. Not hurt, not anger. Something worse. Decision. Aurelia reached for the small silver clasp at her wrist. For one terrifying moment, Julian thought she might remove something and throw it at him. Instead, she unclasped a bracelet. It was an old piece, simple silver, nearly worthless by court standards. She placed it calmly into his palm. Julian stared at it. "What is this?" "You gave it to me the week before we married." His fingers slowly closed around it. "I remember." "Do you?" The question landed harder than he expected. Aurelia turned. She did not run from the ballroom. She did not cry. She walked, slowly, past Lady Cressida, past the king's advisors, past the women who had already begun whispering about her. And as she reached the doors, Julian called after her. "Aurelia." She stopped. Half the ballroom seemed to stop with her, but she did not turn around. Julian took one step forward. Then Aurelia said quietly enough that only those nearest heard her, "You needn't worry, Your Grace." A pause. "You will never see me wear it again." Then she left. Julian believed she meant the gown. He was wrong. By sunrise, Aurelia was gone. Not from the palace. From Blackthorn House. Her maid was gone. 2 trunks were gone. 2 trunks were gone. Her writing desk had been emptied. The blue gown remained hanging inside her wardrobe, and on Julian's breakfast table lay a single sealed note. He broke the wax. There were only 6 words. "You asked me not to return." Julian read them twice. Then a third time, he summoned the butler. "When did Her Grace leave?" "Before dawn, Your Grace." "Where did she go?" "I was not told." "Who accompanied her?" "Mrs. Bellamy and the driver." Julian stood. "What driver?" The butler hesitated. "Not one of ours." That was the first thing Julian found strange. The second came 10 minutes later. Aurelia had not taken the Blackthorn carriage. She had not used Blackthorn horses. And according to the stable master, she had arranged her departure almost 4 days before the royal ball. Julian went still. 4 days. That meant she had planned to leave before he ever insulted her. His humiliation had not caused her departure. It had merely given her the excuse to leave sooner. Julian suddenly looked back at the letter. You asked me not to return. Something cold settled in his stomach. Where had his wife intended to go? And why had she told him nothing? By noon, London knew. By evening, London had improved the story. The Duchess had fled to France. The Duchess had joined a traveling theater. The Duchess had inherited secret money. The Duchess had left because the Duke had taken a mistress. The Duke had left because the Duchess had taken one. By the next morning, according to Lady Cressida, Aurelia had apparently escaped dressed as a nun. Julian ignored all of it. For the first week. Then he began sending letters. Ashwick Hall, no reply. Her aunt in Bath, no reply. Her childhood friend, Lady Marian, no reply. Finally, after 12 days, one letter returned, unopened. Julian stared at his own handwriting. Return to sender. No explanation. That evening, he poured himself a drink, sat in the dark drawing room, and placed Aurelia's silver bracelet on the table. He had given it to her 9 years earlier, before he became Duke. Before his elder brother died unexpectedly, and the title fell to him. Before Blackthorn became one of the richest estates in England. They had been standing beside a river outside the village of Rosewick when he fastened the bracelet around her wrist. He had been 23. She had been 19. He had apologized because it was inexpensive. Aurelia had smiled. It matters because it came from you. He had believed her. And for 9 years, she had worn it everywhere. Until the night he told her she looked like someone begging to be overlooked. Julian picked up the bracelet. For the first time, regret arrived. But regret was not yet the worst thing waiting for him. That came 3 weeks later. His steward entered the library carrying a stack of accounts. Your Grace. Julian barely looked up. What is it? Something regarding the northern estate. Leave it. I think you should see this. Julian glanced up. His steward, Mr. Henslow, had served Blackthorn for 19 years. He was rarely nervous. He looked nervous now. Julian reached for the paper. What am I looking at? Payments. To whom? That is the difficulty. Julian's eyes moved down the page. Hundreds of pounds had been transferred over several years. Small sums at first. Then larger ones. Always approved. Always recorded. But attached to nearly every payment were 2 initials. A.V. Julian's expression changed. Aurelia? I believe so. For what? We don't know. Julian looked through the documents. Payments to a printer, a seamstress, a schoolmaster, 2 widows, a carpenter, a small workshop in Wellingford, a solicitor in London. What has my wife been doing? Mr. Henslow hesitated. There is something else. He produced another document. Julian read the heading, then slowly stood. Blackthorn Women's Industrial Fund. What is this? I was hoping your Grace might know. I have never seen this. Your signature appears on the original authorization. Julian looked down. There it was. Julian Matthias Vane. His own signature. He remembered signing hundreds of estate papers. He did not remember this one. How much? Nearly £8,000 over 6 years. Julian stared at him. 8,000? Yes, Your Grace. What did she do with it? We are still discovering that. Julian's anger returned. Not because of the money, because Aurelia had hidden something enormous under his own roof. Find her. Mr. Henslow hesitated. Your Grace, find my wife. But they did not need to, because the following morning, an invitation arrived from the palace. Julian opened it expecting another dinner. Instead, he found a card stamped with Queen Helena's private seal. His eyes moved across the writing. He stopped halfway. Read it again. Then rang for his secretary. Who else received this? I don't know, Your Grace. Julian handed him the card. The secretary read it. His eyebrows rose. The Queen requested the pleasure of His Grace the Duke of Blackthorn's attendance at the Royal Exhibition of Enterprise and Charity. That was not unusual. The next line was, the evening's principal presentation would be delivered by Her Grace Aurelia Vane, Duchess of Blackthorn. Julian stared at the words. His wife had ignored every letter he sent, yet she was returning to London. Not to him, to the Queen. But beneath Aurelia's name appeared something even stranger. A title. The Blue Room Project. Julian had never heard of it. Neither had his secretary. Neither had Henslow. By evening, everyone at Blackthorn House was asking the same question. What was the Blue Room Project? 3 days later, Julian discovered the first answer, and wished he had not. A man arrived at the estate requesting an old account ledger. He introduced himself as Mr. Elias Mercer. Julian received him personally. You worked with my wife? Mercer seemed surprised. For years. Julian concealed his reaction. Doing what? Mercer studied him. Her Grace never told you? No. Silence. Then Mercer looked almost uncomfortable. I think she intended to. When? After the King's winter ball. Julian's jaw tightened. The same night he humiliated her. Mercer continued. She said she finally had enough evidence. Evidence of what? Mercer's expression changed. I assumed that was why she left. Julian leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, evidence of what? Mercer hesitated, then said something Julian would repeat in his mind for the next 4 days. Evidence that someone has been stealing from Blackthorn. Julian went still. How much? I don't know. Who? I don't know that either. Then what do you know? Mercer looked directly at him. That your wife discovered it years ago. Julian stared at him. Years? Yes. Why didn't she tell me? Mercer gave the answer quietly. She tried. Julian's face changed. Suddenly he remembered conversations he had dismissed. Questions about tenant accounts. Questions about warehouse contracts. Questions about names on invoices. Questions about why certain families were being charged twice. He had told her not to involve herself. Again and again. A terrible realization began forming. The gown at the winter ball. The plain blue gown. He remembered the silver stitching. He had thought it decorative. What was on her dress? Mercer blinked. Her dress? At the ball. Julian stood. Silver stitching, along the sleeves. Mercer's face drained of color. What symbols? Julian tried to remember. Numbers. Small leaves. A strange pattern near the cuff. Mercer slowly removed a document from his case. Did it look like this? Julian looked. His stomach dropped. The design on the page was identical to the embroidery he had mocked before the entire court. What is it? Mercer swallowed. An account code. Julian said nothing. Mercer pointed to the sequence. This identifies every property where money disappeared. The room became silent. Julian suddenly understood. Aurelia had not worn a cheap gown. She had worn evidence. In public. Before the King's ministers. Where the person stealing from Blackthorn would see it. And Julian had stood before the entire court and ordered her never to wear it again. 4 nights later, Bellemere Palace was packed. Everyone wanted to see the Duchess who had disappeared. Some expected scandal. Some expected reconciliation. Others expected Julian to arrive with Aurelia on his arm. He arrived alone. The Queen's great exhibition hall glittered beneath hundreds of candles. Julian barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the enormous doors at the opposite side of the hall. Then the herald struck the floor with his staff. Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackthorn. The doors opened. Every conversation died. Aurelia entered. Julian forgot to breathe. She was wearing blue again, but not the gown he had forbidden. This one was different. Striking. Regal. Impossible to overlook. And stitched across the entire skirt, in shimmering silver thread, were hundreds of names. Not symbols. Names. Men. Women. Villages. Businesses. Families. The entire court stared. Julian's gaze dropped to the final name embroidered near the hem. He knew it. He knew the man personally. He was standing inside the ballroom, and the moment Julian looked toward him, the man began moving toward the nearest door. Aurelia saw him too. She did not react. She simply continued walking toward the queen. Then, as she passed Julian, she whispered 4 words without looking at him. "Now watch who leaves." Julian's blood went cold. 3 people were already heading for the exits, and one of them was the man Julian trusted with everything. 3 people were leaving the ballroom. That should have been impossible to notice. Bellemere Palace held nearly 400 guests that night. Noblemen drifted between conversations. Servants moved constantly. Musicians changed places. Courtiers entered and left whenever boredom demanded it. Yet Julian noticed those 3 immediately, because Aurelia had told him to. Now watch who leaves. The first was Sir Barnaby Crewe, Blackthorn's chief land agent. The second was Lord Silas Morden, Julian's cousin and occasional advisor. The third, Julian's stomach tightened, Mr. Thomas Henslow, his steward, the same man who had brought Julian the suspicious accounts. The same man who had claimed not to know what Aurelia had been doing. The same man Julian had trusted for 19 years. Henslow reached the door first. Julian started after him. Aurelia caught his wrist. "Don't." He turned sharply. "He is leaving. I can see that. Then why are we standing here? Because if you follow him now, you prove nothing." Julian stared at her. "You knew Henslow was involved?" "No." That stopped him. "What?" Aurelia kept watching the 3 men. "I suspected one of them." "Which one?" "Silas." Julian looked toward his cousin. Lord Silas had stopped near a marble column and was pretending to speak with an elderly baronet. "And the others?" "I needed to see who became frightened." Julian's voice dropped. "You used your gown to frighten them?" "Not the gown." She looked down at the silver names embroidered across it. The names. Julian suddenly understood. The hundreds of names were not victims. They were not witnesses. They were transactions. Aurelia had placed something inside those names that only the guilty would recognize. "What did you change?" he asked. For the first time, the corner of Aurelia's mouth moved. "You finally asked the right question." Then Queen Helena called her forward. "Aurelia." Every face turned. Julian had no choice but to step back. His wife walked toward the raised platform. She did not look nervous. That troubled him more than if she had. For weeks, Julian had imagined what their reunion might be. Anger, tears, an argument behind closed doors, perhaps forgiveness. He had not imagined standing 20 feet away, while the woman he had publicly humiliated prepared to expose a conspiracy connected to his name. Queen Helena rose. "Ladies and gentlemen, many of you have asked why tonight's exhibition includes a gown." A few people smiled. Aurelia did not. The Queen continued. "You will soon understand that it does not." 2 attendants pulled away the cloth covering the first long table. Beneath it were ledgers. Dozens of them. The second cloth was removed. Letters, receipts, contracts. The third, small embroidered panels, each labeled with a village. Julian counted rapidly. There were 43. The Blue Room Project. Suddenly, he knew why it had that name. At Blackthorn House, there was a forgotten room at the end of the eastern corridor. Blue wallpaper, blue curtains, blue painted shelves. Aurelia had asked years earlier if she could use it. Julian had barely looked up from his newspaper. For whatever you wish. He had never entered it afterward. 6 years. His wife had spent 6 years building something 20 rooms away from his study. And he had never once asked what. Aurelia addressed the room. 6 years ago, I began receiving letters from women living on my husband's estates. Julian felt every eye shift toward him. Most were not complaints, Aurelia continued. At first, they were questions. She lifted one letter. Why had rent increased twice in 1 year? Another. Why had payment for delivered wool never arrived? Another. Why had a widow been charged for repairs to a cottage she did not occupy? Nobody whispered now. Each question looked insignificant by itself. She paused. That was the cleverness of it. Julian glanced toward the door. Henslow had disappeared. Sir Barnaby was gone too. But Silas remained. Why? Aurelia continued. The losses were always small enough to be dismissed. £5 here, 12 there, a missing payment, an incorrect invoice, a duplicated repair charge. She turned toward the covered tables. But small theft becomes very large when repeated hundreds of times. A nobleman near the front asked, "How large?" Aurelia looked at Julian. Not accusingly, almost sadly. More than £31,000. The room erupted. Julian did not move. £31,000. Enough to purchase estates. Enough to destroy families. Enough to stain the Blackthorn name permanently. Queen Helena raised one hand. Silence slowly returned. Aurelia continued. My husband did not take this money. Julian looked at her. She had just protected him. Before the entire court. After everything he had done. But then she added, he did something more ordinary. Her eyes met his. He trusted the wrong people and refused to listen when inconvenient questions were placed before him. That hurt more, because it was true. Several people looked away from Julian. Aurelia picked up one embroidered panel. The Blue Room project began because documents disappeared whenever I asked too many questions. Julian's head lifted. Disappeared? Aurelia heard him. She answered from the platform. Yes. He stepped closer. From Blackthorn House? Yes. Who had access? Aurelia held his gaze. You. A murmur passed through the room. Julian frowned. And? Me. Another pause. And Mr. Henslow. Julian looked toward the empty doorway. There it was. The first real piece. But Aurelia was not finished. Which is why I stopped keeping evidence on paper. She lifted the embroidered village panel. These women memorized it. The room fell completely silent. Julian stared. Aurelia turned the embroidery over. On the reverse were tiny lines of thread. Numbers. Dates. Initials. Amounts. Every pattern was a ledger. 43 pieces of embroidery. 43 hidden account books nobody knew were account books. Julian's expression changed. The gown he had mocked had been one of them. The blue gown. The silver stitching. Evidence hiding in plain sight. Queen Helena stepped forward. Duchess Blackthorn brought the first pattern to me privately several months ago. Julian looked sharply at Aurelia. Several months. Before the ball. Before she left him. The Queen continued. I advised her that suspicion would not be enough. She required proof, linking the missing sums to those receiving them. Aurelia looked toward the ballroom doors. Tonight was intended to provide that link. Lord Silas suddenly laughed. Too loudly. Every head turned. This is absurd. Julian stared at his cousin. Silas stepped forward. You cannot accuse gentlemen because they left a ballroom. Aurelia's voice remained calm. I have accused nobody. Then why are we standing here listening to this? Because you volunteered to. Silas's smile vanished. Several guests exchanged glances. Aurelia descended from the platform. You saw your name on my gown. Silas looked down. You embroidered hundreds of names. Yes. You expect me to remember all of them? No. Aurelia stopped several feet away. Only the one that is not yours. Silas froze. Julian looked from him to Aurelia. What does that mean? Aurelia pointed toward her skirt. Lord Silas Morden appears twice. Julian found the names. Silas Morden. Then farther down, Silas Morden. Silas scoffed. A sewing error. No. Aurelia's voice sharpened. One is your name. She touched the second. The other is the name used to open an account at Wakefield & Sons Bank. Silas's face changed. Only slightly. But everyone saw it. Julian stepped forward. You opened an account using your own name? Silas recovered quickly. Apparently someone did. Aurelia nodded. Yes. Silas looked relieved too soon. Then Aurelia said, except the account was opened 9 years before you began using the title Lord Morden. Silas stopped breathing. Julian did too. 9 years earlier, Silas had been merely Mr. Silas Vane. His father had still been alive. Nobody could have opened an account under the title Lord Morden, except someone who knew years in advance that Silas would eventually inherit it. Unless... Julian frowned. That makes no sense. Aurelia looked at him. It wasn't opened 9 years ago. Silence. It was opened last year. Julian stared. Then why? The bank ledger was backdated. Now the room erupted again. Aurelia raised her voice slightly. The thieves altered old estate accounts to make recent transactions appear historical. She turned toward Silas. And they made one mistake. The Queen spoke. They used a title that did not exist on the date they entered. Silas went pale. Julian felt something inside him collapse. His cousin. His childhood companion. The man who had advised him after his brother's death. Silas looked toward the door. 2 royal officials were standing there now. He could not leave unnoticed. He smiled bitterly. So this is why you brought everyone here? Aurelia answered. No. Silas frowned. No? This was never about you. For the first time, genuine fear appeared on his face. Julian felt it too. Aurelia turned toward the empty place where Henslow had stood. Silas could not alter Blackthorn's internal records alone. Julian whispered. Henslow. Aurelia nodded. And Henslow could not move £31,000 without someone authorizing payments. Julian's stomach dropped. My signature. Yes. I never authorized them. I know. Then who did? Aurelia stared at him. Nobody. Julian frowned. She walked toward the first table and opened a ledger. Your signature was copied. Julian stared at the page. Perfect. His handwriting. His flourish. Even the unusual break in the letter V. How? Aurelia did not answer immediately. Then Julian remembered. His study. His correspondence. Hundreds of discarded drafts. Cancelled contracts. Old letters. Anyone inside Blackthorn House could study his signature for years. He looked toward Silas. Silas said nothing. Julian stepped closer. You forged my name. Silas laughed nervously. You have no proof. Aurelia closed the ledger. He is right. Julian turned. What? Silas's confidence returned. Aurelia looked almost amused. These documents prove the records were altered. She gestured toward the gown. They prove the money moved. Then she looked at Silas. But they do not prove who forged Julian's signature. Silas smiled. There. He looked around the room triumphantly. A spectacular performance. Nothing more. Julian's frustration exploded. You knew this before tonight? Aurelia looked at him. Yes. Then why bring them here? To make them panic. And now 2 have escaped. Aurelia's expression remained calm. No. Julian stared. No? She glanced toward Queen Helena. The Queen nodded to an attendant. A side door opened. Mr. Henslow entered. Julian stopped. Henslow looked miserable, but he was not being dragged. He walked freely. Behind him came Sir Barnaby Crewe. Julian's confusion deepened. You caught them? Aurelia shook her head. They were never escaping. Henslow looked at Julian. I am sorry, Your Grace. For what? Henslow glanced toward Silas. For pretending not to know. Silas's face went white. Julian understood slowly. Henslow was helping you? Aurelia nodded. For 11 months. Julian looked at the steward. You knew everything? Not everything. You lied to me. Henslow lowered his head. Yes. Julian nearly shouted. Why? Aurelia answered. Because Silas trusted him. That silenced him. This entire evening had been staged. The nervous steward, the missing documents, the sudden discovery, Henslow leaving the ballroom, all of it, a trap. And Julian had not even known which side his own steward was on. Aurelia faced Silas. When Henslow left this ballroom, you believed he was frightened. Silas said nothing. So you followed the plan exactly. What plan? Henslow was supposed to retrieve the final ledger from the retiring room. Silas's eyes widened. Aurelia continued. You intercepted him. Julian turned to Henslow. The steward reached inside his coat and removed a folded note. I was instructed to hand this to anyone who stopped me. Silas backed away. Aurelia took the paper. It contains false bank information. Julian understood. Aurelia had fed Silas a lie. If he had nothing to do with the theft, the information meant nothing. But if he was involved, a royal official stepped forward, carrying another note. Aurelia held them side by side. Less than 10 minutes after Henslow gave Silas this false account number, a palace messenger was paid to carry instructions to Wakefield and Sons. Silas's face collapsed. What instructions? Julian asked. Aurelia unfolded the second note. To empty the account before midnight. Nobody spoke. Julian looked at Silas. Silas looked toward the floor. The trap had closed. Yet Aurelia's expression did not show triumph. Instead, she seemed troubled. Julian noticed. There's more. She did not answer. Aurelia. She turned toward him. There is always more when people steal for 6 years. Julian's eyes narrowed. What haven't you told me? For the first time that evening, she hesitated. That frightened him. Queen Helena stepped down from the platform. Perhaps this should be discussed privately. Julian looked between them. Discussed? Aurelia said quietly. The money was not the only thing taken from Blackthorn. Julian's chest tightened. What else? She looked toward Silas. He suddenly smiled. Not pleasantly. Defiantly. You still haven't told him? Aurelia's face hardened. Silas laughed once. Oh, this is magnificent. Julian grabbed his arm. Told me what? Silas looked directly at him. Ask your wife why she truly left. Julian released him. Aurelia went still. Silas continued. You think it was because you embarrassed her over a dress? Aurelia stepped forward. Enough. But Silas had found the one weapon left to him. Words. He looked at Julian. She was already leaving you. Julian remembered the carriage. Arranged 4 days before the ball. He turned slowly toward Aurelia. You said nothing. Aurelia's eyes met his. Silas smiled. Ask her what she found in the Blackthorn inheritance papers. Julian stared. My inheritance? Aurelia. Silas ignored her. Ask her why your brother's final instructions disappeared. Julian's face emptied. His elder brother, Nathaniel, had died 7 years earlier after a sudden illness. The estate had passed directly to Julian. There had been no mystery, no dispute. At least, that was what he had believed. Julian looked at his wife. What did you find? Aurelia glanced around the crowded ballroom. Not here. What did you find? Silas answered for her. A letter. Aurelia's voice sharpened. Silas. A letter from Nathaniel. Julian could barely hear the room anymore. To whom? Silas's smile disappeared. To you. Julian looked at Aurelia. You have a letter from my brother? She swallowed. Yes. How long? 3 months. And you never gave it to me? I couldn't. Anger flashed through him. You couldn't? Because someone had cut away the final page. Julian stared. Aurelia continued. The surviving pages accuse someone inside Blackthorn of manipulating estate accounts before Nathaniel died. Julian's gaze slowly returned to Silas. Silas shook his head. Convenient. But Aurelia was watching Henslow now, not Silas. Julian noticed. His anger shifted into confusion. What? Henslow's face had become strangely pale. Aurelia whispered, "Mr. Henslow?" The steward did not answer. "Henslow." He finally looked at her, then at Julian. "I never thought you would find that letter." The ballroom seemed to vanish around Julian. Aurelia stared at him. "What did you say?" Henslow closed his eyes briefly. "I said I never thought you would find it." Julian stepped backward. The man who had helped expose Silas knew about Nathaniel's missing letter. Aurelia's voice became very quiet. "How?" Henslow looked at her. Then something changed in his expression. Resignation. He reached into his inner pocket. Not for a weapon, for a small folded piece of yellowed paper. Aurelia stopped breathing. Julian saw the torn edge. It matched something. Something Aurelia had hidden. The missing final page. Henslow held it between two fingers. "I think," he said, "Your Grace should read this before deciding who betrayed whom." Julian reached for it. Aurelia caught his hand. "Julian." He looked at her. For the first time since she entered the ballroom, she looked frightened. Not for herself. For him. "What is written there?" Aurelia did not answer. Henslow did. The reason Nathaniel never intended Julian to inherit Blackthorn. The missing page trembled in Henslow's hand. Nobody in the ballroom moved. Julian stared at the torn sheet, as though it had changed the temperature of the room. The reason Nathaniel never intended Julian to inherit Blackthorn. Henslow's words seemed to remain suspended between them. Julian looked at Aurelia. "You knew this?" "No. But you had the rest of the letter." "Yes." "For 3 months." "Yes." "And you said nothing." Aurelia's voice softened. "Because the letter did not say what Henslow just claimed." Henslow almost smiled. "Not without the last page." Julian held out his hand. "Give it to me." Aurelia caught his sleeve. "Julian." He looked at her. Whatever anger he had felt toward her disappeared when he saw her expression. She was not afraid of what the page would say about herself. She was afraid of what it might do to him. That frightened him more. "Give it to me," Julian repeated. Henslow handed him the page. Julian unfolded it. The handwriting was Nathaniel's. There was no question. His brother had always formed the letter T with an unnecessarily long stroke. Julian would have recognized it anywhere. He began reading. "My greatest concern is no longer the accounts. It is Julian." Julian stopped. Aurelia watched his face. He continued. "He trusts affection too easily when it arrives disguised as loyalty. Should I fail to correct what has begun here, I cannot permit the estate to pass into his hands without protection." Julian's fingers tightened. Several people nearest them were trying not to listen. Queen Helena stepped forward. "Perhaps we should move this discussion elsewhere." Julian did not hear her. He read the next line. "Blackthorn must therefore be placed temporarily under trusteeship until..." And then the page ended. Not naturally. Someone had cut away the bottom. Julian looked up. "This is not the entire final page." Henslow said nothing. Aurelia turned sharply toward him. "You told us that was the missing page." "It is part of it. Where is the rest?" Henslow's silence answered first. Julian folded the paper. "Who has it?" Henslow looked toward Silas. Everyone followed his gaze. Silas laughed. "You cannot be serious." Julian walked toward him. "Do you have it?" "No." "Then why did he look at you?" "Because the man is desperate." Henslow finally spoke. "Because his father had it." Silas's expression changed. "Only slightly." But Julian saw it. "His father?" Henslow nodded. "Lord Morden." Julian remembered the old man. Charming. Generous. Always present at Blackthorn. He had advised Nathaniel. After Nathaniel's death, he had advised Julian. He had recommended Henslow for greater responsibility. He had introduced Silas to several bankers. Julian suddenly understood the shape of the thing. This began before Silas. Yes, Henslow said. Aurelia whispered. How long? Henslow looked toward the embroidered panels. Nearly 12 years. Julian's stomach turned. Long before Aurelia began investigating. Long before the Blue Room. Long before Julian became Duke. Henslow continued. Lord Morden discovered that Nathaniel rarely checked smaller estate accounts himself. He began with repairs, materials, transportation fees. Julian stared. You helped him. Henslow lowered his eyes. At first. Silas scoffed. At first? Henslow turned toward him. I was 29, badly paid, and stupid enough to believe your father when he said no one was being hurt. Aurelia's gaze sharpened. And later? Later the amounts grew. So you stopped. Henslow gave a bitter smile. I tried, Julian said. But by then, they had something on you. Yes. Your signature. Yes. Henslow looked at Aurelia. When Her Grace began asking questions, I thought everything was finished. Aurelia's expression tightened. You were the person removing documents from the Blue Room. Yes. Julian moved toward him. You let my wife think she was in danger of being discovered. Henslow did not defend himself. I did. And then you helped her. Yes. Why? Henslow looked Julian directly in the eye. Because she noticed people you never noticed. The sentence landed harder than Julian expected. Henslow continued. I had worked inside your household for years. I thought nobility meant people like you spoke, and people like me obeyed. He glanced at Aurelia. She asked my opinion. Julian said nothing. She asked what I knew. She asked why I looked frightened. She asked whether my wife's medicine had become too expensive. Henslow swallowed. No duke had ever asked me such things. Julian looked away. He understood the insult hidden inside the truth. Aurelia had seen people. He had seen positions. Steward, tenant, seamstress, servant. He had never wondered what frightened them after the door closed. Silas clapped slowly. Beautiful. Every head turned. He smiled. A thief discovers morality. A duchess turns account books into needlework. And somehow I become the villain because my father was more intelligent than yours. Julian's face hardened. Enough. Silas laughed. Why? Because Nathaniel was right? Julian moved closer. About what? That you were never prepared for Blackthorn. Aurelia stepped between them. Silas wants you angry. Julian did not take his eyes off his cousin. Silas smiled. He always was the clever brother. There it was. The old wound. People had said it throughout Julian's childhood. Nathaniel was responsible. Nathaniel was patient. Nathaniel understood money. Nathaniel would become Duke. Julian was charming. Julian rode well. Julian made people laugh. Useful qualities in a younger son. Worthless ones in an heir. Then Nathaniel died. And Julian inherited everything he had never been trained to carry. Silas knew exactly where to strike. You inherited because there was nobody left, Silas said, not because anyone believed you deserved it. Julian's jaw tightened. Aurelia turned to him. Do not give him what he wants. Silas looked at her. You protected him for 3 months because you knew the same thing. Aurelia faced him. No, you hid Nathaniel's letter. Yes. Why? This time she answered immediately. Because it was incomplete. Silas laughed. So? So Julian spent 7 years believing his brother trusted him. Aurelia's voice grew firmer. I was not going to destroy that with half a sentence. Julian looked at her. For the first time, he understood. She had not hidden the letter to deceive him. She had hidden it because evidence without context could become a weapon. Exactly what Silas was doing now. Julian looked down at Nathaniel's torn page again. Where is the rest? Silas shrugged. Ask Henslow. Henslow shook his head. I never had it. Aurelia stared at Silas. Then something changed in her expression. She looked toward her gown. The names. The silver stitching. Then toward the 43 embroidered panels. Her eyes narrowed. Your father did not destroy it. Silas said nothing. He kept everything. Still nothing. Every false account, every duplicate contract, every signature. Aurelia stepped closer. Men who build schemes like this rarely destroy proof. Silas's smile weakened. They keep it, because eventually, they no longer trust the people helping them. Julian understood. Insurance. Aurelia nodded. She looked at Henslow. Where did Lord Morden keep his private papers? I don't know. Silas interrupted. This is ridiculous. Aurelia ignored him. Think. Henslow frowned. His library, perhaps. Too obvious. His estate office? No. Then Julian remembered something. A childhood visit. Silas's father sitting at a writing table, laughing as he locked papers inside. The music cabinet. Silas went still. Julian looked at him. His reaction was tiny, but Aurelia saw it too. What music cabinet? She asked. At Morden House. Julian's voice quickened. His father kept a cabinet beside the pianoforte. He never allowed servants to open it. Silas scoffed. My father collected music. Julian stared at him. Your father hated music. Silence. That was enough. Queen Helena turned to one of her officials. Have the cabinet secured before anyone enters Morden House. Silas stepped forward. You have no authority. The queen looked at him. I am very old, Lord Morden. The ballroom quietened. And one advantage of age is knowing precisely how much authority one possesses. Silas said nothing more. The gathering ended shortly afterward. Not officially. Nobody announced that the evening was finished. People simply began leaving with the dazed expressions of guests who knew they had witnessed a scandal that would occupy London for months. Julian remained. So did Aurelia. For several minutes, neither spoke. The enormous room slowly emptied around them. Finally, Julian said, You knew there was a second scheme. I suspected. You came here anyway. Yes. You stood before everyone wearing evidence. Yes. His eyes dropped to her gown. Hundreds of names shimmered beneath the chandeliers. How many people made this? 72. Julian almost laughed. Not from amusement, from disbelief. He had mocked her first gown for being too simple. He had told her to dress like a duchess. Now half the kingdom would remember what she wore tonight. Not because it was expensive, because it meant something. He swallowed. That night, Aurelia did not rescue him from the sentence. Julian continued. I thought you were trying to embarrass me. I know. I thought the gown made Blackthorn look small. I know. And all the while, you were trying to save it. Aurelia looked at him. No. Julian frowned. She stepped closer to the embroidered panels. I was trying to save the people being robbed. That distinction humbled him more than anything else had. Not his title. Not his estate. People. Julian looked down. I'm sorry. Aurelia remained silent. He almost repeated himself, then stopped. An apology was not a key. It did not automatically reopen a door after someone had been shut outside. I suppose that is not enough. No. He nodded. It shouldn't be. Aurelia looked surprised. Julian took the silver bracelet from his pocket. He had carried it every day since she left. He placed it on the table between them. I kept this. She looked at it. I know. How? How? Your valet told my maid. Despite everything, Julian smiled faintly. Apparently nobody in my household respects confidentiality. Aurelia almost smiled. Almost. Then Julian became serious. I told you never to wear that gown again, because I was ashamed of what people might think of me. He looked around the room where she had just exposed the truth before the entire court. Tonight, every person here was looking at you. Yes. And for the first time in my life, I was proud to be the person standing beside you. Aurelia's expression softened. But you were not standing beside me. The truth hit immediately. Julian nodded. No. She picked up the bracelet. He watched. Will you come home? Aurelia looked at him. To Blackthorn. To me. Her answer came quietly. Not yet. Pain passed across his face. But he did not argue. When? I don't know. What do I do? Aurelia considered him. Learn the names. Julian frowned. She touched one embroidered name on her skirt. Start there. The cabinet at Morden House was opened the following morning. Inside were 11 years of altered accounts. Private letters. Copied signatures. Lists of payments. And the missing bottom half of Nathaniel's final page. Julian read it alone. Blackthorn must therefore be placed temporarily under trusteeship until Julian understands that an estate is not inherited merely by receiving its keys. He must learn its people. If he does, he will become a better duke than I ever could. Julian sat motionless for a long time. Nathaniel had never believed him incapable. He had believed him unfinished. And somehow, years later, Aurelia had given him exactly the same lesson. Silas was removed from all involvement with Blackthorn Holdings, and the stolen funds were traced through accounts connected to his father's old network. Henslow confessed his role. Julian did not excuse it, but Aurelia persuaded him that punishment without repair would merely create another ruined household. Henslow surrendered his position and spent the next several years helping recover money owed to tenants and tradespeople. The Blue Room project became permanent. Aurelia expanded it into an independent office where estate workers could challenge incorrect accounts without seeking permission from the very men whose decisions they questioned. And Julian? He began doing something nobody expected. He visited. Not ceremonially, not with announcements. He traveled from village to village carrying a notebook. He learned the baker's name, the widow who supplied linen, the carpenter with 6 daughters, the woman who had stitched the first silver account code into Aurelia's sleeve. Months passed. Then one rainy afternoon, Aurelia returned to Blackthorn. No crowd waited. No musicians played. Julian found her standing in the entrance hall wearing a plain blue traveling dress. For one moment, he could not speak. Aurelia noticed. She glanced down. You dislike the dress? Julian closed his eyes briefly. I believe I have lost the right to comment on blue dresses for the remainder of my natural life. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard that sound in months. He walked toward her. Are you staying? Aurelia looked around the house, then at him. I thought I might begin with dinner. Julian smiled. Dinner is excellent. And tomorrow? We will negotiate tomorrow. She held out her wrist. The old silver bracelet was there. Julian stared. Aurelia raised an eyebrow. You once told me never to wear something again. He gently touched the bracelet. I regret almost every word I said that night. Almost? One word was correct. She waited. Duchess. Aurelia smiled. Julian shook his head. Though I understood the word entirely wrong. He looked at her plain blue dress. A duchess is not a woman who wears what makes people admire her. His gaze returned to hers. She is a woman who can make an entire court look at what everyone else refused to see. And from that day onward, nobody at Blackthorn ever asked why Duchess Aurelia chose a particular gown. Because the last time someone mocked what she wore, she exposed 11 years of deception, saved hundreds of families from further losses, and taught a duke that the most expensive thing a man can wear is pride.